Greetings boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our channel, and today we're gonna have a review on the Fatal Frame, the Maiden of Black Water. The first entry in the Fatal Frame series came out in North America for the PS2 in 2002, and I guess, or third, never mind, let me google that. Yeah, 2002, and was heavily inspired by the trend of Japanese horror films that followed the original Ring movie. Two sequels also of the PS2 followed in 2003 and 2005. There was a fourth game in the series with the Nintendo Wii, but we didn't leave Japan. The fifth game in the series was originally released the Wii U on 2015 and has now been remastered with updated controls for all modern consoles. The big questions I had about the release were: how will the game control, since the original version used the Wii U gamepad in some pretty unique ways, and how will be in a 20-year-old style of horror hold up in 2021? The scare factor of Maiden of Black Water will heavily depend on a played young Japanese woman with too much long hair can still be terrifying. I would argue that is what genuinely frightening is heavily subjective true, and I find a lot of negative reviews of Fatal Frame Maiden of Black Water focus on the fact that it wasn't frightening enough. To be honest, I rarely get freaked out while playing horror games or watching horror movies. That's not where my enjoyment of them comes from. I don't care if Fatal Frame doesn't scare me as long as it's fun to play, interesting to look at, unique with some ideas, and I found the word interesting. Fatal Frame Maiden of the Black Water is dripping with the intriguing horror atmosphere. The story follows three different protagonists as they investigate the supernatural happenings involving deaths of shrine madness at Hikami Mountain. It's a good enough narrative, and I was really enjoyed that episodic nature and multiple perspectives. But where the Maiden of Black Water shines in its presentation of the story. The game begins with the player controlling a woman in a subreal lake surrounded by weirdly attractive ghosts. Instead of following her story, we are quickly treated to her demise and told that our story will take place where the other events unfolded. It was a really nice narrative punch to get got, and that hooked me immediately. And I really don't find the horror image to be dated. It was actually a pretty refreshing horror experience to see something in Japanese today. There are elements of gameplay that are very typical survival horror, but they emergently felt more refreshing throwback that dated. It reminded me of the wider PS2 survival horror games like Rule of Rose, Haunting Ground probably, and of course the Fatal Frame. Their survival horror games were all fairly unique in their atmosphere and tried to play with the established Resident Evil Silent Hill formula. There are stiff controls, linear paths, and awkward moments, but captivating ideas that overshadow these shortcomings. It's also worth noting here that Maiden of Black Water brings back the swimwear costumes that the Wii U version ported. People will roll their eyes at this, but those swimwear costumes are actually quite appropriate to the particular game, and I think the developers would have been well severed to write them in defining default costume in some way. The interaction of bodies in water and wet sheet of clothing and skin is always technically appropriate to game that works hard to turn something unavoidable and into something larger with danger. Of course, this point is little underdone by the fact that the male character doesn't have a swimsuit of his own, but still, I maintain that the costumes were uncomfortable and unfortunate omission with the Wii U original that I'm glad to see that return. After many say about, I should probably talk about the game a little. Maiden of Black Water traditional survival horror, as I said before, where Resident Evil has forged ahead and morphed into action blockbuster properly, and Western horror games have spent up in kind. Maiden of Black Water feels glacial, but it has a deliberate thought practicing and builds atmosphere incredibly well. Puzzles are kept relatively single, but they do follow the tradition for the genre, and the camera-based combat system is hugely engaging. Common ghosts are straightforward enough, but when you're biting shrine maiden ghosts that are attracting you via ghostly dance, hungering man ghost that disappears before driving you about, and childish ghosts that dash around as playful as they deadly lighting up to necessary ghost shot to exorcise them effectively takes an entirely different skill set from the standard horror shooter. I should also mention that the Maiden of Black Water really does a poor job of letting people know that the game is full genuinely distressing imaginary. It's actually quite extreme, and even on a second viewing there are cutscenes and imagery that are chilling. You could easily say, well, it's a horror genre, what do I expect? But we're not talking about simple gore and hooks through the hands a la Resident Evil. We're talking about explicit depictions of ritual violence, suicide, and other things such as will be beyond the limits of people. Additionally, Maiden of Black Water adopts a haunted house approach to this imaginary rather than making a conversation about it, so some might find it a bit uncomfortably exploitative. None of this affects my personal view of believing in this magnificent valuable game. I'm only including this review so that people understand what they are getting into, given the publishers weren't being responsible there. I kid you not, you are going to see things in the game. To wrap this review up, I'll quickly mention that was upgraded from the Wii U original version, not much. The visuals have been updated as gorgeous as the visuals already were, that's always appreciated. Additionally, there are some new costumes to play around with. The most significant addition, however, is game photo mode. This is all a Koei Tecmo done a really good job with. The depth of the options and various camera tricks available, you go beyond a simple pause and take screenshot option, and the will Koei Tecmo not quite up to strength of Sony in providing players the photo models that you can produce actual art. Maiden of Black Water photo is still going to be a lot of fun for people. Project Zero Maiden Black of Water is so deeply Japanese that you come away from it learning a bit wonderful horror storytelling traditional that the cool has. While some might find themselves at odds with a very just satisfied traditional about a horror game that should play, if you go with an open mind understanding the cultural context that leads to the game turning on this way, then you find to be really remarkable and enlightening game and art. It's not unlike going to art gallery for your exhibition really, it's way more better.